Well, us- while we are reforming the sumptuary laws of the country, what about your proposal to eliminate the progressive feature of the income tax? Am I correct that you calculated a few years ago that if you eliminated all deductions, you could have a top rate of 23%, but also a minimum rate of 23% and raise the same amount of money?
Well, the situation now is even more striking, Bill, and it's this. You see, you don't really have a progressive income tax. If by progressive you mean higher rates on people of higher incomes, this is a semantic business, and I don't like to refer to the income tax as progressive, because that begs the question. It's graduated, not progressive. In fact, it's a retrogressive measure in terms of its effect on society and on the freedoms of our citizens. But if you look at the situation now, the graduated rates are a fake. The rates go from 14% to 70% at the top, but very few people pay the higher rates because the income tax law is so full of loopholes I mentioned some of them before in percentage depletion, but capital gains provisions, interest on state and local bonds, etc. There are so many loopholes that very few people pay it.
The effective rate being what, 45 or something like that?
No. Suppose you take the present law, Bill, and suppose you take rates 14 to 70, and you do a bit of arithmetic. At those rates, people have reported on their income tax return a certain total amount of income. And you can ask yourself the question, what flat rate would give you the same amount of revenue? That's only arithmetic. And you were talking about 23%, you said 45%. We might get maybe we could get some of these students here to guess at what that number would turn out to be. If the range is 14 to 70, what do you suppose is the average single rate, which levied on the amount of income now reported, would give you the same revenue?
Do you happen to know the answer?
Yes, of course. You don't suppose. I thought you were aware of the professorial ethics. No professor asks the question.
I know the Socratic manner is not a game at which two people can play.
No.
What is the answer?
The answer is 19%.
19.
Now, in fact, if you substituted 19% for the present 14 to 70% rate, let's suppose you made no change in the law, except you put a flat 19% rate in
all income,
instead of 14 to 70, but let all the definitions. In fact, you would raise a good deal more money than you do now. The reason for that is it wouldn't pay people to get around the tax so much. Here's a man who hires an expensive accountant, sets up a trust, makes gifts in order to get out of a 50 or 60 or 70% rate. For 19%, it wouldn't be worth his while. And thus, in point of fact, it's probably true that something like a 16%, 15, 16% flat rate on currently reported income, even without eliminating any of the loopholes,
would yield
the same revenue.
Yeah.
Now, in fact, if you eliminated the loopholes, what you ought to do, let me go back. Our present income tax is a mess. Partly, exemptions are lower now than they have ever been in our history in real terms. In dollars, they're the same as they were during World War II, $600 plus a allowance per individual for standard deductions. But in real terms, they're much lower because prices have doubled since then. And what we really ought to do to reform the income tax, and this would improve the negative income tax too, is to double exemptions, double present exemptions, eliminate all special deductions, substitute a flat rate for our present graduated rate, and if we do that, I have made a rough guess that if you doubled present exemptions, had a negative income tax below those higher exemptions and a positive income tax, and had a single rate of 25% up and down the scale, you'd raise as much revenue as you do now, after taking into account the negative income tax payments.
In other words, the exemptions plus the increased exemptions plus the negative income tax would make the difference between 19 and 25.
Oh, yeah. Well, you see, you'd be paying the 25 on a smaller amount
Correct.
of income because you'd have double exemptions.
Correct.
And maybe 25% is an overestimate. I just try to get the largest number that would be necessary under those circumstances. But the main point I want to emphasize is that the people who say we are in favor of graduated taxation have to go to the next step and say, do we now have it? And they must say to themselves, if they look at the facts, no. What we now have is a snare and a delusion. On paper, we have highly graduated rates. In fact, we don't. In fact, if you look at the average rate paid by people in different income classes. That rate is higher in the middle income classes than it is in the very highest income classes.
Because of financial mobility?
No, because the middle income classes tend to be have a much larger fraction of their income from wages, and it's harder to avoid taxes on wages. The higher income groups tend to have a larger fraction of their income from property, and therefore they can use capital gains, they can use state and local securities, etc.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, we appear to have run out of time. Our thanks to William F. Buckley, Jr. and his guest, Milton Friedman, and our audience, representatives of Fordham University.